Movie reviews here. Today, I'm going to explain a comedy, horror, and thriller film called Fright Night 2, New Blood. Spoilers ahead. Watch out and take care. One evening, a woman is pumping her gas at a remote gas station. While waiting for it to finish, she goes back inside her car to preoccupy herself when suddenly, a snarling assailant breaks through her car window. As it tries to reach for her, the assailant gets scorched from the rosary on her rear view window. She screams for help, but nobody is around. She notices that her gas tank is overflowing, so to save herself, she grabs her lighter and hops off the car before throwing the igniter towards it. Although the explosion sets the perpetrator on fire, it seems unfazed. She helplessly runs inside the desolate store, but the assailant gets to her before she can even call for help. Peculiarly so, the assailant's figure isn't showing up on the security camera footage as it starts sucking her blood. At present times, a group of college students has flown to Romania for abroad classes, which includes Charlie, alongside his best friend, Ed, and ex-girlfriend, Amy. Despite being excited about the opportunity to be in Romania, Charlie doesn't have everything in his favor because Amy still won't give him another chance in love. She doesn't give in even when he tries to hand her a box of chocolates, but understandably so, because he cheated on her. Instead of bothering Amy further, Charlie just goes to his designated room with Ed. While there, he catches a glimpse of the apartment across the road, where he catches sight of Jerry getting intimate with a woman. Though Charlie peeps with excitement, it soon turns into terror when Jerry bites into the woman's neck, making her drip blood. He calls for Ed to check it out, but when he does, Jerry and the woman are already gone. Speechless, Charlie doesn't even get a chance to explain himself, so Ed just shows him something else. It turns out a famous monster hunter, Peter Vincent, is also in Romania to film a new episode of Fright Night, where he's exploring the Poenari Castle, seemingly looking for vampires. In class, Charlie is preoccupied looking at Amy, who seems uncomfortable with his staring. But his attention is immediately divided when their new professor comes in, which turns out to be Jerry. While everyone marvels at her flashy entrance, Charlie is filled with a mix of worry and fear. During a night's tour, their guide mentions that the story of Dracula was also based on a woman, not just Vlad the Impaler from history. Ed speaks up, pointing out that it was Elizabeth Bathory, also known as Countess Dracula, an important historical figure who apparently drank blood to replenish her youth. Amid the tour, Charlie excuses himself to find a bathroom. He wanders around the place until he comes across Jerry. Once more, he sees her pleasuring someone before she looks directly at Charlie to taunt him, showing him her vampire eyes. But when he looks away, they're gone in an instant. Bewildered, Charlie tries looking for them, but instead, Ed comes up from behind, telling him that the tour is over. The next night, they attend Jerry's night classes, where he sees the professor sniff Amy. This makes Charlie stand up defensively. However, the students seem to be stopped in time, not even flinching or looking in their direction. Suddenly, Jerry slits Amy's throat, making him jump in horror as her blood splatters to his face, only to realize he was having a nightmare. Despite this, Jerry insinuates that it wasn't merely Charlie's dream, and it seems like she's messing with him using psychic powers. After the class, Amy checks on Charlie if he's okay. So, Charlie takes his chance to give Amy some flowers, but she just thanks him without accepting the modest bouquet. Ed comes by, teasing him about the failed attempt at showing affection. However, Charlie ignores it and asks him about Jerry instead. Despite Charlie telling him that there's something weird about their professor, all Ed could comment on was her appearance. When he gets back to their lodging, he sees a police commotion in the lobby. Apparently, investigating a lost person case. Inside their room, he finds a note from Ed saying he snuck out to go somewhere, so Charlie is left alone. During this moment, he sees Jerry across the window again, seemingly worried about the police. He stares in bewilderment as he sees her jump down from her window with ease, all while holding a large trash bag before driving away with it. Charlie tries to chase the detectives, but he's already too late. Therefore, as an alternative, he sneaks inside Jerry's apartment instead. Inside her abode, Charlie is greeted by darkness as the apartment's windows are tinted with a UV filter. Looking around, he comes across an old portrait of Jerry, but his snooping gets cut short when he hears footsteps arriving at the apartment. Thankfully, he finds an unlocked room to use as his hiding spot. Furthermore, he comes across a secret room that is hidden behind a bookshelf. The path leads him to a hallway with clocks all over the walls. Down the hallway, he ends up in front of a bathtub filled with blood. But as he hears the arrival of people within the secret room, he goes to hide inside the coffin, keeping the lid ajar. With a clear view of the bathtub, he watches as two people stand in front of it, one young woman and one old hag. While the apparent ritual goes on, he watches in fear as the old hag slits the woman's throat with telekinetic powers. Furthermore, she suspends the woman above the bathtub, draining her blood. While the old hag bathes in the blood-filled tub, she turns back to the young and attractive Jerry. However, Charlie isn't as discreet as he thinks because Jerry stares straight at his hiding spot. When Charlie tries to film her, he shakes in terror when his camera can't capture Jerry. When Jerry opens the casket, Charlie distracts her with a flash of his camera before running away. He calls the police and tells them that a vampire has taken the missing people. Understandably so, they hang up on him. So, instead, he runs straight to Amy to warn her. But when he arrives at her room, he sees that Jerry is already there. Nonetheless, Charlie just tries to pull Amy outside. However, when he tells Amy that Jerry is a vampire, she just laughs at his face. Still, Charlie is unwavering and grabs Amy's Bible to keep Jerry away. However, Jerry simply takes it away from him, not even flinching as the book touches her skin. Due to the unpleasant encounter, the professor takes her leave, but as Jerry waves Charlie goodbye, he sees that her palm was actually burned from touching the book. Once the professor is out of Amy's room, Charlie still tries to convince Amy of his theory. But due to their relationship conflict, Amy just kicks him out of her room. When Charlie returns to his own room, he immediately researches Elizabeth Bathory, one of the earliest human beings rumored to be a vampire. Much to his shock, the picture of Elizabeth Bathory online is the same as the portrait of Jerry in her apartment. Suddenly, Ed surprises him, behind his laptop, telling him about his night. However, Charlie is still too wound up in Jerry being a vampire, so he tells Ed about it. This time, Ed somewhat believes him and even gives Charlie an overview of Elizabeth Bathory's life as told from a comic book. Apparently, Elizabeth became a vampire after being bitten by one. The only thing that can bring her back to normal is by taking the blood of a virgin, born at the stroke of midnight during a blood moon. Ever since then, Elizabeth roamed free to look for what she needed. And so, Ed gets the idea of consulting Peter Vincent for help, realizing that Elizabeth is Jerry. Much to their surprise, they find Peter Vincent in a strip club, barely even acknowledging them seriously. He sets the record straight that he doesn't actually believe in monsters. Despite a seeming dead end, Ed manages to employ his help by offering money. So, Peter agrees to help them in exchange for $2,000. They immediately set out into the night, where Charlie runs into Amy. After seeing Peter with them, she connects the dots right away, knowing they're up to no good. Because of that, she comes along with them. As the group arrives at the subway, Ed tells Peter that they can get Jerry while she's at her weakest, then drive a stake through her heart. This makes Peter back out, so Ed raises the offer to $3,000. With the prospect of huge cash, Peter walks back with them. However, when the train arrives, Peter catches sight of Jerry inside the train car. She successfully spooks him away by showing him her vampire eyes. So, he hurriedly walks off the train before the door is closed, much to the group's dismay. Jerry walks slowly towards the group, with Charlie shielding the two behind him. Although Amy tries to greet Jerry, her disguise falters when the man sitting on the train suddenly drops from his sitting position, revealing that Jerry was sucking on his blood earlier. Because of this, Jerry drops the facade and starts attacking the group. Ed immediately tries to stop her with a picture of a rosary, but it obviously doesn't work. Panicking, Charlie grabs Amy's cross necklace and stabs it into Jerry's eye. As they try to escape, Ed sacrifices himself so the other two can run away. Despite wanting to save Ed, who's being bitten by Jerry, Amy pulls Charlie outside. But Jerry doesn't kill Ed and turns him into a vampire instead. While Amy and Charlie try to outrun Jerry, they go through a manhole that leads to the underground tunnels. However, Jerry locates them easily with her radar powers and starts chasing them immediately. With all the running, they soon encounter an overhead exit and start stacking boxes to escape. But Jerry is hot on their trail and slashes Amy's leg just as Charlie is pulling her up. The two resurface inside a chapel, immediately burning Jerry, disappearing to save herself. However, she finds a new motive to chase the two after tasting the blood left on her nails, realizing that Amy is the virgin she's looking for. The couple runs outside and hails a taxi to take them to the airport. Unfortunately, Jerry appears in front of them. As the cab driver fails to pay attention to the road, They crash against Jerry, which ends up overturning the vehicle. With no time left to waste, Jerry takes Amy with her and invites Charlie to meet them back at her house. Meanwhile, Peter, who bailed on the group, is back at the strip club and gets ambushed by the Turn Dead. He starts throwing Peter around the bathroom, angrily getting back at him for abandoning their group and being a phony monster hunter. However, Ed gets affected by Peter's cross tattoo, so the man is able to scorch Ed's face against his torso. On the other hand, Jerry takes Amy into her bathing pool of blood, enchanting her to fall under her spell. Concurrently, Charlie remains relentless and goes back to Peter for help. Now that he's taking the vampire threat seriously, he takes a picture of Charlie before letting him in, making sure he isn't a vampire. Worried about Jerry, Peter is now equipped with a Stakofix, the weapon rumored to have killed Vlad the Impaler, as in Dracula. Except it's not to fight against Jerry but to protect himself while he leaves the country. Unable to convince Peter for assistance, Charlie leaves, but not before accepting some parting advice. Peter tells him that if Jerry is killed before the next morning, anyone she's bitten that night will turn back to human. He also tells Charlie that he'll find Jerry in the bathhouse of the Cactus Castle. Now, with Amy under Jerry's charm, she's unable to protest with anything Jerry does to her. She slowly leads Amy into the pool of blood, preparing her for the ritual. She also tells Amy that she needs to kill her beloved, Charlie, for the ritual to work. Soon enough, Jerry bites into Amy's neck and turns her into a vampire. When Charlie arrives at the castle, he makes sure to check all his equipment, the 2 stakes under his sleeve, garlic, and holy water. Inside, Ed lures him to an ambush by pretending to be Amy. As the two get into a scuffle, Charlie knows he has no choice but to defeat Ed because he's no longer himself. After a few moments of throwing him around, Ed tackles Charlie to the ground. When he finds an opening, Charlie pours holy water inside his friend's mouth, making his stomach combust. Charlie immediately starts apologizing to Ed, but he's already dying. Suddenly, Jerry appears behind Charlie and grabs him. When they arrive at the bathhouse, she throws him in the pool and leaves Charlie with Amy. But, of course, Amy is no longer herself, either, simply focusing on the need to kill Charlie as per Jerry's command. Despite Charlie trying to keep Amy at bay with a stake, she simply throws it away from him. She starts tempting Charlie with a kiss but throws him off the bath before rushing to bite his neck. She pushes him back into the pool, trying to drown him. But, Charlie breaks through the surface, now a vampire himself. Jerry arrives, commanding Amy to kill him, but Charlie rises from the bath with a plan. He takes his discarded stake before driving it into his own body. The action incapacitates Amy momentarily, as they seem to be connected. But Charlie didn't stake himself through the heart, so their wounds heal quickly. While Jerry is distracted by Amy, Charlie tries to take his chance by attacking her. But even with his newfound abilities, Jerry still overpowers him greatly. When Jerry urges Amy to kill Charlie with the stake, a spear impales Jerry on her chest. It turns out Peter has returned to provide Charlie with backup. Just in the nick of time, the clocks all chime to signal the break of dawn. However, Charlie and Amy still aren't turning back to normal. It turns out Peter's attack did nothing against Jerry because he missed her heart. Due to this, Jerry turns into her vampire form before attacking Peter. On the other hand, Amy goes back to cornering Charlie into the pool and is about to bite him again. With one final Hail Mary, Charlie uses a sonic scream to shatter the windows within the bathhouse. As the sun bursts into the room, Jerry starts scorching to death. Meanwhile, he pushes Amy under the blood bath to protect themselves against the sunlight. When the two resurface, they're back to their normal selves. Outside, they split ways with Peter but not before thanking him for coming back. Afterward, Charlie gives Amy a cross necklace, and the two kiss passionately, both glad to be alive.